You're under arrest for identity theft of federal agent. My stepson declared to the whole house, even as my military badge hung around my collar. He thought he'd won. He didn't know who I really was. Before I take you through how that moment unfolded and why it shattered everything my family believed about me, do me a small favor. Show your support and let people know you're here. Because stories like this only reach others when real people help share them. My name is Harold Whitman. I'm 83 years old. And on a quiet Sunday afternoon in Brookhaven Ridge, Pennsylvania, I was arrested in my own dining room by my stepson, the town's acting police chief. The smell of roasted chicken still hung in the air when it happened. Butter, pepper, and herbs clung to the warmth of the room, mixing with the low hum of forced conversation. I remember lifting my fork, ready to take a bite, when Daniel pushed his chair back and stood up. The scrape of wood against tile cut through the room like a warning bell. My fork froze midair. Margaret, my wife, stiffened beside me. Her hand tightened around her water glass, knuckles pale. Across the table, relatives shifted in their seats, sensing something coming but not yet understanding what. Daniel didn't hesitate. He never did. He liked control. He liked moments where all eyes were on him. "You are under arrest," he said loudly, his voice steady and practiced, "for identity theft of a federal agent and unlawful possession of federal credentials." Silence crashed down over the table. Every face turned toward me. Daniel reached to his belt and produced a pair of handcuffs, letting them glint under the ceiling light. Then he placed a thick folder on the table, right next to the serving dish, as if it belonged there. "I have evidence," he continued. "Photos, records, documentation, everything I need." I didn't speak. That bothered him more than any denial ever could. He took a step closer, eyes fixed on the identification badge resting against my collar. To him, it was proof of fraud, a costume piece worn by an old man pretending to be something he wasn't. "You've been lying to this family for years," Daniel said, "and today it ends." He snapped one cuff around my wrist. The sound echoed too loudly in the quiet room, cold metal pressed into skin that had known worse, but never from family. I didn't pull away. When he forced my other arm behind my back and locked the second cuff, I felt Margaret flinch beside me. She didn't say a word. Neither did anyone else. That silence told me everything. Daniel straightened, shoulders squared, drinking in the moment. This wasn't just an arrest to him. It was a victory, a public one. He believed he'd finally expose me. The quiet man who never talked about his work, the husband who vanished for months at a time, the stepfather who refused to explain himself. He thought he'd cornered a fraud. What he didn't know was that by placing those cuffs on me, he'd already triggered something far beyond his authority. But to understand how we reached that moment, you have to go back. 18 years earlier, I'd left Brookhaven Ridge behind without much ceremony. I didn't storm out. I didn't make speeches. I simply moved forward into a life that demanded distance and silence. When I married Margaret years later, I knew her son would never trust a man who spoke in half answers and disappeared without explanation. Daniel grew up believing authority was earned by visibility, badges, titles, recognition. Everything about my life contradicted that worldview. I work for the National Strategic Security Directorate. Even now, I won't spell out specifics. Not because I want mystery, but because secrecy becomes instinct when it keeps people alive. My work required compartmentalization. My family existed in one box. My duty existed in another. I never crossed them. Daniel noticed. Over time, curiosity turned into suspicion. Suspicion hardened into resentment. The lunch invitation hadn't surprised me. Daniel had been pushing for it for months. Family reconnecting, he called it. I recognized it for what it was, a controlled environment, a stage. I agreed to attend because at 83, you learn something important. Avoiding conflict doesn't prevent it. It just delays it. That afternoon, I noticed the signs immediately. The unfamiliar sedan parked down the block. The way Daniel checked his phone more than necessary. The careful placement of people around the table. This wasn't a gathering. It was a setup. When Daniel began listing his accusations, pulling documents from that folder, I already knew how this would end. Surveillance photos, misinterpreted records, redacted pages he didn't understand but believed he did. He spoke with confidence, and confidence convinces people faster than truth. My relatives watched stunned as he explained how I'd created a fake federal identity, how I'd used military connections to gain access to restricted equipment, how I'd betrayed public trust. No one questioned him. Why would they? He was the acting police chief. I was the quiet old man who never explained himself. When Daniel finally asked if I had anything to say, I looked at him calmly and asked one simple question. Are you sure you have jurisdiction for this? The flicker of doubt in his eyes lasted less than a second. Then he laughed. Nice try, he said. You don't get to lecture me on the law. That was when I pressed the concealed emergency beacon sewn into my belt. 3 seconds. Silent. Invisible. By the time Daniel marched me toward the front door, hand on my shoulder, authority radiating from every step, I felt something unexpected. Calm. He thought the story was ending. In reality, it had just begun. And within minutes, the truth would arrive at our quiet little house with a force Daniel Whitman could never have imagined. Daniel marched me out of my own house like he was escorting a trophy. His hand stayed firm on my upper arm, not guiding so much as displaying. The front door swung open and the late afternoon air hit my face, thick with humidity and the smell of cut grass. Neighbors' curtains twitched. Word traveled fast in Brookhaven Ridge, especially when the acting police chief made a spectacle of it. 2 uniformed officers stood near the curb. Young men, nervous. They avoided my eyes. Get him in the cruiser, Daniel ordered, voice loud enough to carry. I was lowered into the back seat, vinyl cool against my wrists. The door slammed shut, sealing me in. Through the glass, I watched Daniel step back, straighten his uniform, and pull out his phone. He turned slightly away, but not enough to hide his grin. I've got him, he said into the phone. Yes, federal impersonation. Big one. I want him processed personally. He was building his narrative in real time. Hero cop exposes dangerous fraud. In a town like this, that story would spread before sunset. Inside the cruiser, I checked my breathing. Slow, controlled. The beacon had been activated. There was nothing else to do but wait. Daniel leaned into the open window. You had a lot of chances to come clean, he said quietly, the edge of triumph softening into something closer to contempt. You chose to lie instead. I met his eyes. You should step away from this now. He scoffed. Still pretending you're in charge? Then he shut the door. The cruiser pulled away from the curb, rolling slowly down the street. Daniel followed in his own vehicle, lights off, savoring the moment. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. He believed he had all the time in the world. He was wrong. We hadn't gone far when I felt it, a low vibration through the seat, almost imperceptible. Then another, not sirens, not yet, something heavier, purposeful. The cruiser slowed. The officer driving glanced into his mirror, confusion tightening his jaw. Headlights flared behind us. Then in front, dark vehicles slid into position with mechanical precision, blocking the road completely. They weren't marked. No lights. No noise beyond engines idling with restrained power. The cruiser stopped. What the hell? The officer muttered. Doors opened. Men moved. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Efficient. Calm. Black jackets. Clear command spoken low but firm. Hands visible. Step out of the vehicle. Daniel's car screeched to a halt behind us. He jumped out, badge already in hand. What is this? He shouted. Who authorized? A man stepped forward, cutting him off with nothing more than his presence. He held up credentials Daniel couldn't miss. This is no longer your operation. The man said evenly, step back. Daniel bristled. I'm the acting chief of police here. That man is under arrest. The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You are interfering with a federal response. That word, federal, landed hard. One of the agents opened my door. Another unlocked the cuffs, careful, respectful. Sir, the first agent said quietly, are you injured? No, I replied, flexing my wrists. Thank you. Daniel stared, his mouth opening slightly. "What's going on?" he demanded. "Why are you uncuffing him?" The agent turned to him. "Because you just unlawfully detained protected federal asset." Daniel laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "That's ridiculous." The air shifted. A new figure stepped forward from one of the vehicles, older than the others. Broad shoulders. Calm authority that didn't need to announce itself. He stopped in front of me and raised his hand in a crisp salute. "Commissioner Whitman," he said, "clearly, we received your signal. Are you secure?" Every sound seemed to disappear. The agent snapped to attention. The officers from Brookhaven Ridge looked like statues carved in disbelief. Daniel's face drained of color. "Commissioner," he whispered. I returned the salute. "I'm secure." The man nodded once, then turned to Daniel. "Daniel Whitman," he said, "you are hereby relieved of your authority pending a federal investigation." "That's not possible," Daniel stammered. "He's lying." "I proved." "You proved nothing," the commissioner interrupted. "You misused your position, violated federal law, and endangered a classified operation." Agent stepped in, hands guiding Daniel's arms behind his back. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. "You can't do this," Daniel protested, voice cracking now. "I was protecting my town." "You were protecting your ego," the commissioner said calmly, "and you failed." As Daniel was led away, his eyes found mine. For the first time, there was no arrogance there, only fear. The street fell silent once more. Inside my house, faces pressed against windows, Margaret stood frozen in the doorway, her expression unreadable. The commissioner leaned closer to me. "We'll need to secure the residence and collect any compromised material." I nodded. We walked back inside together, the same room where Daniel had accused me only minutes earlier, now filled with quiet authority. Agents gathered the scattered documents, sealing them into evidence bags. Margaret finally found her voice. "Harold, what is happening?" I looked at her, really looked, at the woman I loved, who had lived beside a truth she never fully knew. "I told you I couldn't explain," I said softly. "This is why." Her shoulders sagged, not in anger, in realization. Outside, engine started. Daniel was gone. The story Brookhaven Ridge would tell that night would be very different from the one Daniel had planned. And for the first time in decades, my silence had finally spoken for itself. The house felt smaller once the agents finished clearing it. Not physically. Nothing had changed about the walls or the furniture, but the weight of what had happened pressed in from every corner. Conversations died before they started. People avoided my eyes the way they always had when things became uncomfortable, except now discomfort had teeth. Daniel was gone, taken quietly, efficiently, without the spectacle he'd tried to create for me. Margaret sat at the dining table long after everyone else drifted into the living room. Her hands rested flat on the wood, as if she needed the contact to stay grounded. I stood across from her, unsure which version of me she was seeing for the first time. "You could have stopped him," she finally said. Her voice wasn't accusatory. It was tired. "You knew this would happen." I didn't answer right away. At 83, you learn that silence can be kindled in reflexive truth. "I knew it was possible," I said carefully. "I didn't know he'd go this far." She shook her head slowly. "He's always needed to be right." So have I admitted. The difference is, I learned when to stay quiet. That wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the honest one. The next morning, Brookhaven Ridge woke up to rumors instead of sirens. Official statements came later, carefully worded, stripped of anything that resembled drama. Daniel Whitman had been placed on administrative leave pending a federal investigation. No details, no explanations. In a town built on speculation, that vacuum was unbearable. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and thin smiles. Some offered apologies. Others offered silence. A few avoided the house entirely, as if whatever authority had arrived with those black vehicles might still be lingering. Margaret didn't leave the house for days. The federal inquiry moved faster than anything Daniel had ever controlled. Interviews, depositions, timelines reconstructed down to the minute. I gave my statements at a secure facility outside town, where rooms had no windows and patience was assumed, not requested. I didn't defend myself. I didn't attack Daniel. I spoke facts, dates, actions, consequences. The evidence did the rest. Daniel's choice to use his position for a personal operation unraveled quickly. Unauthorized surveillance, improper use of department resources, collaboration with a private investigator who should never have been anywhere near federal material. That investigator, Victor Hale, broke first. Faced with federal charges of his own, he told the truth, how he'd warned Daniel, how he'd explained that what he'd uncovered wasn't fake, that it wasn't a game. Daniel hadn't listened. He never did when the truth didn't serve him. Margaret visited him once before the indictment was finalized. She came home pale, quiet, hollowed out. He still thinks he was right, she said, staring past me. He says you manipulated everyone, that you planned this. I closed my eyes, not in frustration, in grief. That's easy for him, I said. If I'm the villain, he doesn't have to face himself. She nodded slowly, as if that thought had already taken root. The trial didn't last long. 3 days. No jury drama. No grand speeches. Just a methodical dismantling of arrogance disguised as duty. Daniel sat at the defense table, in a suit that didn't quite fit anymore. His confidence eroded by the hour. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, he didn't react. He just stared forward, as if waiting for someone to tell him this was a misunderstanding. The sentence was severe. Federal prison. Years, not months. Permanent removal from law enforcement. Mandatory counseling. Margaret wasn't in the courtroom when it happened. I was, not out of spite, out of closure. When Daniel was led away, he looked at me one last time, not with hatred, with confusion. That hurt more. Life didn't return to normal after that. It adjusted. Margaret and I spoke less. When we did, conversations stayed on safe ground, whether groceries, the passing of days. The space between us wasn't anger. It was recalibration. She loved her son. She loved me. Those truths collided and something had to give. Eventually, she left. Quietly. No shouting. No blame. Just a suitcase and a note that said she needed time to understand who she was now. I didn't stop her. Some journeys have to be taken alone. I retired shortly after, not because I was forced out, but because the world I'd operated in no longer needed me the way it once had. Younger minds, sharper tools, different wars. I moved closer to the coast, into a small house where no one knew my name or my past. I planted tomatoes, walked every morning, learned how to sit with myself without the armor of secrecy. Daniel wrote letters. At first, they were angry, then pleading, then philosophical. I didn't respond, not out of cruelty, but because some lessons can be softened. Therapy helped, more than I expected. The doctor once asked me why Daniel's betrayal hurt more than the arrests, the danger, the public exposure. Because he wasn't my enemy, I said. He was my family. And that's the wound that takes the longest to heal. By the time the letters stopped, I felt something close to peace. Not forgiveness, not forgetfulness, acceptance. The kind that doesn't absolve, but allows you to breathe again. There was still one chapter left to close. And it would come, not with confrontation, but with silence. 2 years after Daniel was sentenced, I received a single envelope in the mail. No return address. Just my name, written in block letters that looked practiced, deliberate, prison writing. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the kitchen counter and went about my day, watered the tomatoes, walked the length of the beach path while the tide pulled back from the shore, ate dinner alone, the way I had learned to do without resenting the quiet. Only when the sun dropped low enough to turn the sky the color of old brass did I sit down and break the seal. The letter wasn't long. Daniel didn't ask for help. That surprised me. Instead, he wrote about time, how it stretched and warped inside concrete walls, how silence forced thoughts to circle back on themselves until there was nowhere left to hide. He admitted he had ignored every warning, every boundary, every moment where he could have stopped. I thought being right mattered more than being careful, he wrote. I thought authority meant control. I was wrong. There was no apology, but there was something closer to understanding. At the end, he wrote one final line. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know I finally understand why you stayed quiet. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. That was enough. I never wrote back. Not because I didn't care, but because closure doesn't always require response. Sometimes it's simply the recognition that the truth finally reached the person who spent years running from it. Margaret called a few months later. Her voice sounded steadier than the last time we'd spoken. I moved into a small place near my sister, she said. I'm volunteering at a community library. It helps. I'm glad, I told her, and I meant it. We talked for nearly an hour. No blame, no rehashing. Just two people acknowledging that love doesn't always survive the weight of consequences, even when no one intends harm. Before we hung up, she paused. I should have asked more questions, she said quietly. About you, about your life. Yes, I agreed, but we both did the best we knew how at the time. That was the closest thing to peace we were ever going to get. I continued therapy long after I technically needed to. Not because I was broken, but because reflection is easier when someone knows how to listen without trying to fix you. One afternoon, my therapist asked me if I regretted pressing that beacon. No, I said immediately. She nodded. Do you regret not stopping him sooner? That one took longer. I regret that it had to come to that. I finally said, but I don't regret letting the truth reveal itself. Because that was the heart of it. For decades, I'd lived by containment, by managing risks, by preventing outcomes before they could form. But family doesn't operate on protocols. You can't neutralize resentment quietly. You can't disarm insecurity with silence forever. Daniel didn't become who he was overnight. Neither did I. What happened at that lunch wasn't an ambush. It was an inevitability that had been building for years. All I did was stop shielding it from daylight. In my quieter life, people sometimes ask what I used to do. I tell them I worked in government. They nod, satisfied. They don't need details. And for the first time, neither do I. I wake up early. I read. I walk. I think. Sometimes, when the wind comes in just right off the water, I remember Brookhaven Ridge. The house. The table. The sound of handcuffs closing around my wrists. But it doesn't hurt the way it used to. It reminds me that identity isn't proven by what you say about yourself, or even what others accuse you of being. It's proven by what holds when everything else falls apart. I spent most of my life protecting truths that couldn't be spoken. In the end, the one truth that mattered most was the simplest. I was never a fraud. I was never a coward. I was a man who chose restraint over recognition, duty over validation, and silence over ego. And when that silence was finally mistaken for weakness, the truth spoke for itself without my help. If you've ever been judged by people who only saw the parts of you that fit their narrative, I hope my story reminds you of something important. You don't owe anyone an explanation that endangers your integrity. Live your truth, protect it, and let time do the rest. And if this story stayed with you, do me a small favor before you go. Support the channel, leave a comment letting me know you made it to the end, and share where you're watching from. It helps these stories reach the people who might need them most.